Good evening and welcome back once again to the We Are Marshall podcast. My name is Stephen Marshall and this is my co-host Bill McIntyre. We are just two guys discussing the issues of the day, laying out the facts of those issues, and giving you our opinion and view on those issues. We would also love it here at the We Are Marshall podcast if you would like and share all of our episodes around your social media. We can be found on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Locals, X, Truth Social, and Rumble. Rumble is where we populate our full channel and see with season 1 and 2 of all our episodes. Download the free app Rumble and search for the We Are Marshall podcast. Then subscribe and follow to get notification of new episodes and any other endeavors by Bill and I. Check out our episodes on all these social media sites and share them to help us grow. We would also love it if you would check out our website at www.wearemarshallpodcast.com. You can see a number of things Bill and I are working on the website. If you go to Bill's bio, you can click on a link to all his blog posts. Any new blog posts, Bill?
Yep, few.
Okay, check out. He's got some new ones on there. And then check out Vella on Amazon, where Bill also writes episodic short stories for your viewing. Check out my 2 books currently for sale on Amazon, The Unforeseen Enemy and The Perception Therapist. Both are available now. Also, check out our sponsors, Local Prints, New Hampshire. You can go to our website again at www.wearemarshallpodcast.com and click on the link to Local Prints, New Hampshire on the top left. They are a full-scale screen printing company in Hampstead, New Hampshire, and they are available for domestic and international printing. Go support them as they support us. Also, check out our large sponsor, MakeConnector.com, a large dating website just like all the other big dating websites out there with all the features that the big players have in the dating sphere, but Make Connector is much more inexpensive than any of the other players in the dating market. If you have any questions or issues, you can reach us both at the following emails, Bill at wearemarshallpodcast.com and me, Steve, at wearemarshallpodcast.com. We've also got a new sponsor. You can go check them out at www.armyrangerpainting.com. That's Army Ranger Painting and Contracting. They are a New Hampshire company, and they are a full-service contracting company. Go check them out at www.armyrangerpainting.com. So we have lots to cover today. We've been away for a little bit, so let us jump right into the issues of the day. And I'm going to present the first one, and that's a story that is a few years old, but to me, who's pretty informed, and my co-host who's pretty informed, we didn't know this, which blows my mind completely. And this is something that needs to be shown because everybody's about the criminality around Trump, but how much is there really? So, Justice Department drops criminal case against Michael Flynn. The Justice Department is dropping the criminal case against President Donald Trump's first national security advisor, Michael Flynn, whose lies about his contacts with Russia prompted Trump to fire him 3 years ago and special counsel Robert Mueller to flip him to cooperate in the Russia investigation. The request to drop the case, filed with a federal judge in D.C. District Court on Thursday, is a sudden end to a protracted legal battle that's lately been fertile ground for Trump to attack the early Russia investigation and former FBI leadership he dislikes. It's also a broadside against the Mueller investigation and the FBI, especially officials who served during the Obama administration, whom Trump has now deemed his foes. Both sought to investigate Trump campaign advisors' ties with Russia and the 2016 election and found many interactions between campaign affiliates and Russians, including Flynn's contacts. For more than 2 years, the Justice Department had defended its prosecution of Flynn in court, until Thursday. The department did not brief the White House on its decision to seek to drop the Flynn case. Justice Department spokesperson Kerry Kubek said, in its latest court filing, the Justice Department laid out the reversal in a 20-page narrative, pointing to newly disclosed and declassified records about what happened with Flynn. The prosecutor on Thursday wrote that the investigation in 2017 into Flynn and his phone calls with the then Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak during the Trump transition should not have happened, feeding into the president and his supporters' claims that all of the events that stemmed from Flynn's interview in the West Wing were illegitimate. The filing drew swift criticism from former top FBI officials who had worked on the case and supported the investigation into Flynn. The court must still formally approve the request. Flynn, twice before two separate judges, admitted to lying to the FBI about his interactions with Kislyak during the Trump presidential transition. But last year, he fired his original defense team that cut his deal with Mueller and waged a campaign to try to get a judge to reverse his guilty plea. Flynn faced potential jail time. In its filing, the Justice Department condemned the FBI's work when it interviewed Flynn in the West Wing in the first weeks of the Trump presidency. The FBI's Flynn investigation was already going to be closed, they wrote, when the FBI learned of Flynn's calls with Kislyak before deciding it wanted to interview him. In December 2016, Flynn asked Kislyak not to retaliate against the Obama administration's sanctions and to oppose the Obama administration in an upcoming United Nations vote on Israel. Though the FBI pressed forward, the Justice Department was unlikely to prosecute Flynn for negotiating with Russia before Trump took office. The filing on Thursday said, citing interviews with the then acting Attorney General and others about decision-making in the Flynn case. The FBI approached Flynn in the White House in late January 2017, and in the interview, he denied asking Russia for certain actions. Flynn's legal team and Trump last week had seized on the disclosure of a handwritten note from a top FBI official outlining how agents may either refer Flynn for prosecution of illegally negotiating with a foreign government or get him to lie or get him fired. That note, and whether Flynn's lies in the interview were notable enough to bring a case, also factored into the department's dismissal request on Thursday. The Justice Department called the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into Flynn for his contacts with Russia a no longer justifiably predicted investigation. According to the Thursday filing, after a considered review of all the facts and circumstances of this case, including newly discovered and disclosed information appended to the defendant's supplemental pleadings, the government has concluded that the interview of Mr. Flynn was untethered to and unjustified by the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into Mr. Flynn. A no longer justifiably predicated investigation that the FBI had, in the Bureau's own words, prepared to close because it had yielded an absence of any derogatory information, D.C. U.S. Attorney Timothy Shea wrote in the filing. Shea, a political appointee, alone signed the court document, an unusual move. The Flynn filing was not signed by any career prosecutors at the Justice Department. That's a departure from how lower-level prosecutors typically handle all court filings, even in high-profile cases, including Flynn's. While the political appointees they work for act as figureheads. Just before the filing, a former Mueller team prosecutor who was still in the case withdrew. Another career prosecutor in D.C. who has handled the Flynn case didn't sign the document either. The Justice Department also said it can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Flynn lied, nor that his lies were substantial. The government is not persuaded that the January 24, 2017 interview was conducted with a legitimate investigative basis and therefore does not believe Mr. Flynn's statements were material, even if untrue. Moreover, we do not believe that the government can prove either the relevant false statements or their materiality beyond a reasonable doubt, the filing states. On April 30th, Trump suggested that Flynn would be exonerated and referred to the FBI agents as dirty, filthy cops. It looks like to me that Michael Flynn would be exonerated based on everything that I see, Trump said. I'm not the judge, but I have a different type of power. On Thursday, Trump said Flynn is innocent. I'm very happy for General Flynn. He was a great warrior, and he is still a great warrior. Now in my book is an even greater warrior, Trump said. Attorney General William Barr said the Justice Department had a duty to move to dismiss the charges against Flynn, denying in an interview with CBS News Thursday evening that he was doing the president's bidding with the remarkable reversal and asserting that he was doing the law's bidding. Barr echoed the legal reasoning to drop the case that was laid out in the filing, saying that a crime cannot be established here. The FBI did not have a basis for a counterintelligence investigation against Flynn at that stage, Barr said, adding that people sometimes plead to things that turn out not to be crimes. Former FBI officials, including the agent who interviewed Flynn, condemned the Justice Department's move on Thursday as politically motivated and contrary to the facts of the situation with Flynn, Former FBI Director James Comey, whom Trump had pressured in early 2017 to drop the Flynn investigation, tweeted, "The DOJ has lost its way." Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe defended the early Russia investigation in a statement provided by his legal team. McCabe recounted why the FBI investigated Flynn in early 2017. Flynn had high-level interactions with Russian officials, and the FBI had incontrovertible evidence that Flynn tried to influence those officials, McCabe wrote. The FBI was obligated to interview him to better understand why he was talking to Russian officials. During the interview, he lied about the substance of his conversations with those officials, McCabe said. His lies added to our concerns about his relationship with the Russian government. Later, under oath in federal court, he twice admitted to lying to the FBI. McCabe also took a shot at the Justice Department's new argument that the FBI should not have interviewed Flynn, saying it ignores the considerable national security risk his contacts raised. Moreover, the department's position contradicts the findings by both the special counsel and the Office of the Inspector General, McCabe added. And the defense attorney for former agent Peter Strzok, who left the Russia investigation amid a text message scandal in which he criticized Trump, said in a statement, "This is a sad day for the rule of law in America. Today's action by the Department of Justice provides yet more evidence of President Trump's determination to politicize the department and Attorney General Barr's determination to assist the president in doing so." Mueller, now a partner at a private law firm, did not respond to a request for comment. The Justice Department's Inspector General's office, which previously looked into the FBI's dealings with Flynn, didn't immediately provide a comment. Jeff Jensen, the U.S. Attorney in St. Louis that Barr named earlier this year to review the handling of the Flynn case, said in a statement provided by the Justice Department that he recommended that the case be dismissed. Through the course of my review of General Flynn's case, I concluded the proper and just course was to dismiss the case. I briefed Attorney General Barr on my findings, advised him on these conclusions, and he agreed, Jensen said. Minutes before the announcement, Brandon Van Grack, the lead Mueller prosecutor who cut the deal with Flynn, withdrew from the case. Van Grack gave no detail on the reason for his exit, writing only to the court to please notice the withdrawal. Van Grack remains in his job in the Justice Department's National Security Division. According to the Justice Department, though his sudden exit from the case on Thursday had echoes of how his colleagues quit the Roger Stone criminal prosecution after Barr intervened to soften the recommendation of a prison sentence. I mean, the terribleness of this is the DOJ looks at it clearly and states they shouldn't have even interviewed him. They were about to close the case, and then they pushed this. And then you have Peter Strzok. Oh boy, let's you and Lisa Page text back and forth how much you hate Trump, and then have any comment on the travesty of justice that you seem to think is going on here. Simply ridiculous. And then Bill Barr, let's be real. One thing I didn't like about Bill Barr, he wouldn't do anything that Trump said from what I watched. He used to fight back with Trump. Those two would go back and forth. So the bottom line is you got a general who's a decorated soldier in this country, and the FBI had no problem blasting his life and ruining it. Well, I'm glad that the guy got exonerated and the Department of Justice, with some logical conclusion, got rid of it and let this warrior have his life back. What do you think about this, Bill? Because this is a travesty of what's happened around Trump. Everybody says there's all these people going to jail and getting in trouble, but no one's talking about these cases that get dismissed, dropped, and thrown out. Ridiculous.
I first want to ask you, what made you follow up on this? How'd you discover this?
Well, what made me follow up on it is my second story, which showed a lot of stuff that I'll get into. Is a lot of information in it. So I wanted to look at many of the other players that were around Trump based upon this story. And this is one that I found damning. Here you and I are very well informed. We do all this, and we didn't really know that General Flynn was exonerated.
Well, it got zero publicity because...
Exactly.
All right, here's what my thoughts are on this. You covered the story beautifully. I can't add anything to it, and it's not as incredibly fresh in my memory as I'd like it to be, so I want to try to stay in my lane here. But first of all, I want to say that, it's good that you saw this, because it's good to realize that I like the fact that the media didn't publicize this, because it proves what I've always believed, is that they're not going to go against the agenda. Okay, you had a highly political and extremely false. This whole Russia collusion thing, it's fading from. I don't have quite the vitriol rise up in my throat that I used to when I heard this stupid stuff. It was such a reach all along. It was, I heard my liberal friends going, "Oh, your guy, Russia, Russia, Russia." I'm like, "Oh my God, please just stop, stop." And I said, "There's nothing to this." And then you have a guy who's being put in a situation where he fell on his sword, basically, for the president. And he was clearly coerced by a Justice Department with an agenda. And finally, somebody recognized there was absolutely no precedent of any kind to charge him with anything. And the fact was that when they tried to find any kind of wrongdoing, they simply didn't. So the issues that I have here is that, well, the input that I have is that Donald Trump actually was very active in getting this whole thing thrown out. He did go to bat for the guy. He did fire him over lies that he felt were accused of making to Mike Pence over the whole thing, and Trump was forced on by in a PR manner, if you will, to let him go, a decorated general. And this general, they questioned everything about how it went down. They questioned the means which they questioned. They questioned the information behind it. They questioned everything about it. And then finally they realized they had no case. And like I said, I don't like agendas and I don't like being right. But it is gratifying to a degree that you see that the people who knew about this chose not to tell us because it didn't fit their narrative.
And we see that with them left and right. I mean, so I didn't go on that part, but good assessment.
Well, the whole Mueller investigation, you saw how they reacted when it came back. I mean, he wasn't on the fence. He didn't say 51%, 49 inconclusive. He said there's absolutely nothing that suggests anything. And you still had Shifty Schiff out there going, yeah, but it still happened. And everybody just all of a sudden got all fired up again. Yeah. Which is just comical.
Bill's sticking to his story. Look at Schiff is, McCabe is at the FBI, and Peter Strzok is. Come on.
Yeah. So, I mean, this story is interesting. Only, like I said, I don't mean to be gratuitous because I actually don't. I don't want to relish in people's misery. But the fact is, though, is that there's a certain payback for the bully pulpit that they assumed over this whole thing, and the sheet they tried to pull over the eyes of the American people, all as a distraction from letting the guy settle into office and try and doing what he wanted to do for the country. People can bash Trump all they want. I have a lot of problems with him as well. But the guy came in to work and he wanted to do things and he did nothing but roadblocks. And it's like watching Mario Kart with barrels being thrown out everywhere he went. It was just ridiculous.
Well, it's funny, and I'll move on from this that you bring up Trump like that. But I just saw today on the news, Nancy Pelosi was getting interviewed on a thing. And she tried to she tried to lay out that Trump lost the most jobs in history, and the anchor, which wasn't a Republican,
it was Katie Couric.
Yeah, or wasn't a Republican or even an independent. She is a leftist. Okay.
Oh
she
yeah.
She basically came right out and said, "But there was a pandemic," and she said, "Oh, if you want to back him up, because are you kidding?"
No, she called her a Trump apologist.
Yes, a Trump apologist. That's so laughable.
Has anyone ever called Katie Couric a Trump apologist before?
I just wanted to point that out, just based on.
No, I saw that, and she doubled down too. Katie Couric said, Katie was like, "There's no way that's true. Everybody knows, whether we like it or not, that the jobs are everywhere under Donald Trump."
But that's my first segment. I will tie this up a little better. My second segment here at the We Are Marshall podcast. So I want to hand it to Bill so we can run with his first story of the day. Go right ahead, Bill.
All right. Let's talk about the Raging Cajun, James Carville. If you don't know who James Carville is, let's just say he hasn't been relevant since 1992.
But he did have Bill Clinton. But he did have one of the best quotes ever.
It's the economy, stupid?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And the thing is about James Carville is that he is a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, married to a hardcore conservative. They've always been a big story. And he's entertaining, and I don't dislike the guy. But he, in his effort to support his guy, and to quote my good friend Steve, maybe he was also trying to remain relevant, which is something we talk about often.
Yeah.
He decided to back his boy and address an issue that he thought was relevant in this day and age, which is the engagement of the young voter. Okay. And instead of asking voters, young voters, or encouraging young voters, or even trying to enlighten young voters, what he did was he attacked young voters.
He
And
did.
he went on a YouTube channel of the Politicon YouTube channel, and I watched it. Okay, and it was interesting. It was incredibly just dyed in the wool, in the pocket of the president, as if he hired him to do this. Really, I'm sorry, but that's what it looks like. And he railed against what he felt was the inactivity and lack of interest of young people. And he basically, among the highlights of it is, he says, but that's all right, you expletive 26-year-old voter. You don't feel like the election is important. And let's just say that the media exploded over this. Of course, conservative news also were hotter on Carville than than any more mainstream or liberal leaning outlet. But it was a pretty swift and broad response by a lot of people. And one guy, Eric Abernathy, who's a conservative comedian, filmmaker, and documentarian, he posted a copy of a clip of the video Sunday night, and it got 330,000 views right away. And he said, "Excellent outreach to young voters, James. The kids love nothing more than being scolded by a lizard person." So, an obvious cheap shot about Carville's looks. He's not an attractive man, and I'm not really thrilled about the fact that he chose to make a looks shot, because there's enough there. You didn't need to do the looks.
Carville made a cheap shot at a 26-year-old person. So
he did, but be above board and attack the content of it, So what he did was, though, is he really alienated a lot of people, and he didn't do anybody a favor, because, as it turns out, Joe Biden is actually suffering with the young vote. Either lack of turnout, estimated projection of turnout on young voters is about just hovering around 50% over recent polls. And also there's a belief that in all polling across multiple outlets, and by multiple outlets I mean by covering multiple schools of thought, meaning across liberal as well as conservative leaning sources, Donald Trump seems to be seizing a good portion of not only women but young voters. And of all the people who are estimated to vote in this election, the only increase among young people of people who said they were now going to vote was among people who identify as Republican. So it's a real problem for Joe Biden, and the media had a field day with it. So I'm just going to say that the issues that Carville discussed, he said, issues like abortion, interest rates, and housing affordability are often overlooked by the media and by Democratic officials. And he was trying to get them involved in these things and what he called the meat and potato issues. Okay. He said, you are being insufficiently served by the commentariat and to some extent insufficiently served by Democrat messaging. So my advice to these young people is to get off your expletives and go vote. You should vote like the entire future of the United States depends on it, because it does. So this is what he did, okay? He made this most ridiculous statements in which he said that under Donald Trump, you're looking at a theocracy. There'll be no government left. There'll be no rights left, and you will live in a theocracy. You'll end up with a Christian nationalism, which Donald Trump is not a factor in if Trump wins. So this was a call. This has begged people to rebut that, okay? Basically, what people came out and said is that, like it or not, and this is one guy said, I am the least person you'd ever call a Donald Trump fan. He goes, but somehow in Donald Trump's 4 years, the government did survive, and our system is intact. So I reject that notion, So scare tactics as well, and just very, very misinformed. And I think Carville really lowered himself when he did this. So I'm going to leave that there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover something that I thought was very interesting. I decided that I'm going to look up and see what young people do care about as far as political issues.
Why not? Because let's be real. That's what he railed on.
Right.
The main thing he said was issues not important to them.
Right.
James, do we not vote for people that have issues that are important to us? If
Mm-hmm.
your guy doesn't have issues that are important to them, well, then maybe it's the messaging from your Democratic Party and your leader of your Democratic Party. Don't
That's right.
blame it on the young kids. I mean, it's
Yeah.
terrible. Yeah, maybe some of them are misguided. We see it in all these riots and stuff. I'm sure you'll get into that. But the
Yeah.
bottom line is, if they're telling you, they're saying, listen, you do not support the issues that I do, there's your problem, James. I don't know what to tell you. It's
That's
almost
right.
the same thing as it's the economy stupid. It's
Yeah.
the issues stupid.
That's right.
Yep.
So this was from late 2023, but let's face it, okay, it's only spring 2024, so a lot of this is relevant. Some may have changed, but not terribly. So I looked up a poll from Harvard University, who has a very famous youth poll that they do every year, and a lot of demographic information for voting and recruiting and campaigning and all that is based upon this source. It's highly credible, and it mentions a national poll released by the Institute of Politics at Harvard Kennedy School that among 18 and 29-year-olds, Biden's approval rating stands at about 33 to 36%, which is lower than it was the last time it was taken. It also finds that half of young Americans have felt unsafe in the last month, with 40% worried about falling victim to gun violence. Trust in the Supreme Court to do the right thing has fallen by 10 percentage points with youth over the last decade. And less than half of young Americans feel like local police departments make them feel safe. Nearly half of 47% of Americans under the age of 30 report feeling down, depressed, anxious, or hopeless. And 24% have considered self-harm at least several days in the last 2 weeks. Now, that is accurate, okay? This is, I've heard from other sources I've looked into, that angst, anxiety, and general malaise and depression is higher than ever among that block of that demographic, okay? So this is something that's been going on for 20 years, this particular source. And the data collected demonstrates that not only the growing levels of political engagement among young people, but the urgency of addressing serious issues such as mental health, gun violence, housing, and more, said IOP Director Seti Warren. The results of previous Harvard youth polls have had a direct influence on public policy, and I expect to see the trend continue. Okay, so here are some of the takeaways. 1 in 4 young adults approve of the president's handling of the economy, and 28%, and inflation, 22%. 38% approve of his handling of race relations, 37% of the war in Ukraine, and 20% of them on gun violence. Among young registered voters, approval is 38%. While close to two-thirds, 64% of registered voters who are Democrats approve his job performance, approval drops to only 6% of Republicans and 30% of independent and unaffiliated registered voters. 4 in 10 young Americans approve of the performance of Democrats in Congress. That's a lot lower than I thought it would be. While only 3 in 10 approve of Republicans in Congress. Overall, half of young Americans indicate they have felt unsafe in the past month in a shopping mall or public transportation, and even in their own neighborhood or somewhere in their own school, city or town, or their school. 21% of college students felt unsafe at their school. And that extends to a amount of people who feel comfortable admitting their political opinions. 30% of students on college campuses across this country won't, only 30% will actually reveal their political affiliations for fear of reprimand, hatred, or violence.
Understood.
Okay? Yeah. And this was taken pretty much before the whole Israel thing that started, and we all know where the youth today stands on that. That'll be my second story today. So here's some more takeaways. More than 3 in 5 young Americans support stricter gun laws in general. When asked about requiring psychological exams for all gun purchases, support increased to 73%. Half of young Americans support implementing law enforcement policies similar to England, where firearms are not provided to regular police officers. That's those with special training. However, when respondents are only asked if they support reducing the number of police who carry guns, the opposition dropped to 28%. So most young Americans also oppose reducing and reallocating funds for the police departments as part of the defund movement. Only 35% support that. I was very surprised by that. 2 other government programs of social services aimed at alleviating crime. And when the question wording was changed to defunding, opposition rose to a solid 27% support and 57% opposing. So Compared to spring 2018's poll, trust in the United States Supreme Court over to do the right thing all most of the time has decreased. And about as many young people trust police all or most of the time, it's about 50%. So that's interesting as well. I think that flies in the face of a lot of what we think. And they find that the U.S. military is a trustworthy institution. That also is surprising because I thought a lot of the youth felt that our military is largely imperialistic and fighting, unjust wars. Well, in actuality, they don't feel that way. So I think we all make, necessarily incorrect assumptions about the youth of today. 3/4, 73% of young Americans believe homelessness can happen to anyone. Nearly 1/3 of all of them, from 18 to 29, including 43% Hispanic and 39% of Black, are concerned they could personally become homeless one day, which indicates a very, very bleak view of the economy. And overall, 61% of young adults under 30 declare that owning a single-family home represents their ideal housing situation. 10% responded with renting an apartment, 8% renting a house, 8% owning a condo, townhouse, or duplex. And 71% of white Americans indicated owning a house is their own situation, their ideal situation, which was shared by far fewer Hispanic and Black Americans. And then a majority of 53% of all young people under 30 report they would become. So let's see what else is interesting here. When they asked, they think that the voting age should be lowered to 16. 63% of people were in support of that. I'm sorry, support of maintaining the status quo. Young Democrats, 12%, were more likely than Republicans support lowering the age. And while concerns about the efficacy of government pervade, 29% of 18 and 29-year-olds agree that working in some form of public service is appealing to them. I was fascinated by that. And let me see here. 13% reported strong interest in a youth council that can deliver policy recommendations to their member of Congress. Nothing wrong with engaging with your local representatives. And then one of the highest categories discussed was mental health. Nearly half of young adults under 30 report feeling down or worried about homelessness and hopelessness and everything else. So, and then they actually, for the first time ever, asked about loneliness. We found 44% have been bothered by loneliness at least several days in the last few weeks, which has been extrapolated out to possibly the incoming, devices, more screens, and less interaction. A plurality of young Americans, almost 50%, identify as politically moderate. I was really surprised by that as well. 30% identify liberal, 24% conservative. And among those who grew up what they consider a moderate household, 70% identify that way today, which shows another metric, which is just disagreeing with your family dynamic for the sake of it or for other reasons. They also believe that health insurance should be a right. That's not surprising. Food and shelter should be a right. The government should be involved in reducing poverty as a policy matter. And government should do more to cure climate change. Not surprised by that. So these are, it's broad, and I rushed through it. But I would think that most people would agree, and if we really sat down, Steve, and looked at this harder, a lot of this flies in the face of what we may think young people care about. But I think James Carville made a real mistake in lumping all these people between 18 and 29 years old into a box of not caring. He doesn't want to admit that maybe they simply don't like what's going on in this country.
Well, he did kind of admit that, but he's not going to hold to that statement. I mean,
no.
The issues are not important to them. I mean, it just comes down to that, James. Mm-hmm. So like I just said, it's the issues, stupid. Hang on the issues, and that's what will get you. That's why we got a possible debate coming up on the issues. And I mean, if it transpires, Biden is going to get clobbered.
He really is. He really is, because he's not on the right side of the issues that most people across the board feel about this country.
Well, you're right about that, but it's not even that. He's going to be incapable of debating with Donald Trump.
Well, I was staying away from that, but yeah.
All these pollings you're going through, if you've been paying attention, MSNBC, CNN, and even the White House are panicking over these polls. They basically have said, we are going to lose. So,
Well, the thing is,
we'll
they
see.
think that young people, blacks, Latinos, are going to always vote Democrat, no matter what they say, as a matter of policy. And they're finding out that there's a shift now. People actually are educating themselves, despite
Well,
what's
you
happening
got
on
the
college
internet. There's
campuses.
lots of info, and I give kudos to the youth if they're really looking into things and doing stuff. Good
I
for
do
them. That's
too.
a
Yeah,
great, like saying it. But here at the
it's
We Are
encouraging.
Marshall podcast, we've got a couple of good segments behind us. Now we're going to move forward. I got a big one here. This just came out recently. An article by Mr. Sperry in regards to impeachment whistleblower was in the loop of Biden-Ukraine affairs, meaning
Oh,
the person that blew the whistle on Trump to impeach, he was complicit in the Ukraine affairs with the Biden family. Excuse me. The whistleblower who sparked Donald Trump's first impeachment was deeply involved in the political maneuverings behind Biden family business schemes in Ukraine that Trump wanted probed. Newly obtained emails from former Vice President Joe Biden's office reveal. In 2019, then National Security Intelligence Council analyst Eric Ciaramella touched off a political firestorm when he anonymously accused Trump of linking military aid for Ukraine to a demand for an investigation into alleged Biden corruption in that country. But 4 years earlier, while working as a national security analyst attached to then Vice President Joe Biden's office, Ciaramella was a close advisor when Biden threatened to cut off U.S. aid to Ukraine unless it fired its top prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, who was investigating Ukraine-based Burisma Holdings. At the time, the corruption-riddled energy giant was paying Biden's son, Hunter Biden, millions of dollars. Those payments, along with other evidence tying Joe Biden to his family's business dealings, received little attention in 2019 as Ciaramella accused Trump of a corrupt quid pro quo. Neither did subsequent evidence indicating that Hunter Biden's associates had identified Shokin as a key target. These matters are now part of the House impeachment inquiry into President Biden. It now seems there was material evidence that would have been used at the impeachment trial to exonerate Trump, said George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. Again, Turley is not a Republican, who has testified as an expert witness in the ongoing Biden impeachment inquiry. Trump was alleging there was a conflict of interest with the Bidens, and the evidence could have challenged Biden's account and established his son's interest in the Shokin firing. Ciaramella's role, including high-level discussions with top Biden aides and Ukrainian prosecutors, is only now coming to light thanks to the recent release of White House emails and photos from the National Archives. The emails show Ciaramella express shock. Yikes, is what he wrote at Biden's move to withhold the $1 billion in aid from Kiev, which represented a sudden shift in U.S. policy. They also show he was drawn into White House communications over how to control adverse publicity from Hunter taking a lucrative seat on Burisma's board. Yet there is no evidence
See,
Morella raised alarms about the questionable Biden business activities he witnessed firsthand, which is in sharp contrast to 2019. In that instance, he was galvanized into action after being told by White House colleague Alexander Vindman of an improper phone call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. During the call, Trump solicited Zelensky's help in investigating Burisma and Hunter Biden's role in the company. Some former congressional investigators say Ciaramella effectively helped cover up a scandal far worse than what Trump was impeached over. What's more, he failed to disclose that he had a potential conflict of interest stemming from his connection to the matter Trump asked Zelensky to probe when he lodged his complaint against Trump. Real Clear Investigations was the first to identify the then 33-year-old Ciaramella as the anonymous impeachment whistleblower, something major media continue to keep under tight wraps. Ciaramella worked under CIA Director John Brennan when President Obama made Biden his point man on Ukraine in 2014. The same year, Burisma hired Hunter. The next year, the CIA detailed Ciaramella, a longtime advocate for aid to Ukraine, to the White House, where he worked closely with Biden and his staff as a top advisor on key Ukrainian policies. After Biden left office, he stayed on at the GOP White House until mid-2017. Even though he's a Democrat, working as a Ukrainian and Russian analyst on Trump's National Security Council, co-workers there accused him of trying to sabotage Trump, including allegedly leaking sensitive information to the press. Real Clear Investigations has reviewed more than 2,000 pages of newly disclosed archived emails from the former vice president's office related to Ukraine, of which more than 160 contain references to Chiamorella. They reveal that his role advising Biden's office potentially intersects with the current impeachment inquiry in several areas. Chiefly, Chiamorella focused on an aid to Ukraine and anti-corruption reforms in the country. In that capacity, he hosted, cleared into the White House, and met face-to-face there with senior Ukrainian prosecutors. Gave a readout of the meeting to his superiors, who in turn pushed for Shokin's firing. Traveled with Biden to Kiev during the 2015 trip, during which Biden demanded Shokin's firing. Wrote media talking points for Ukrainian officials. Huddled with the top Biden officials involved in discussions concerning the $1 billion aid package and Shokin, including Amos Hochstein, Victoria Nuland, Jeffrey Pyatt, Bridget Brink, and Michael Carpenter. Corresponded with Biden officials coordinating responses to negative media reports about Hunter's cushy and controversial bereavement job. Former Obama-Biden administration officials have confirmed in recent closed-door congressional testimony that Chiamorella was a key part of Biden's process for making policy in Ukraine. In 2016, for instance, a White House photo shows him taking notes at a White House meeting Biden held with then Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk to discuss Ukraine's anti-corruption reforms and other issues. Chiamorella also worked directly with top Obama and Biden administration diplomats on Ukraine, including senior State Department official Victoria Nuland. Eric was regularly the clearing authority to get me into the White House for interagency meetings on Ukraine, Nuland revealed in a 2020 Senate deposition. Asked if she ever discussed Ukraine policy and Shokin with Chiamorella, Nuland testified, "Of course I did. He was part of the interagency process. He was also on my negotiating team for the 7 rounds of negotiations I did with the Russians on the disputed Ukrainian region Donbass." Chiamorella was directly involved in talks concerning the massive U.S. aid package to Ukraine that Biden conditioned on the removal of Shokin, who at the time had seized the assets of the corrupt Burisma oligarch employing Hunter Biden. He also arranged and participated in White House talks with Ukrainian prosecutors visiting Shokin's office. White House visitor logs confirmed Chiamorella escorted Shokin's deputy prosecutor, David Sackler-Leeds, into the White House for a January 2016 meeting. A White House agenda for the meeting lists Chiamorella as point of contact for the Ukrainian delegation. He also checked in Andriy Telizhenko, the Ukrainian embassy official who says they discussed Burisma and Hunter Biden during the meeting, and struggled to understand why his U.S. counterparts were suddenly hostile to Shokin after praising him in earlier talks. Emails from the time show Chiamorella appeared surprised to hear about the linkage between the $1 billion loan to Ukraine and the dismissal of Shokin. Though Biden maintains he insisted Kiev oust Shokin because he was too soft on weeding out fraud in entities that included Burisma, Chiamorella suggested he didn't share the view that Shokin was corrupt. "We were super impressed with the group," Chiamorella added, "and we had a 2-hour discussion of their priorities and obstacles they face." On January 21st, U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Jeffrey Pyatt emailed Chiamorella and other White House aides an article from the Ukrainian press. U.S. loan guarantee conditional on Shokin's dismissal. Yikes. I don't recall this coming up in our meeting with them, Chiamorella replied, referring to the White House meeting he hosted with top Ukrainian prosecutors. But in a closed-door 2020 deposition before the Senate, Pyatt sounded skeptical that Chiamorella was in the dark about the decision. "I think you have to ask Eric what he meant by yikes," Pyatt told Senate investigators. Exactly. He said that he believed conditioning the loan guarantee on Shokin's removal obviously came up in those meetings hosted by Chiamorella, suggesting that Biden's aide knew of the quid pro quo before Pyatt circulated the article about it from the Ukrainian press. The day before he hosted the Ukraine prosecutors, Ciamarella received an agenda from a State Department official that asked him to note the importance of appointing a new prosecutor general, reiterating that Shokin is an obstacle to reform, according to emails. The agenda also called on Ciamarella to ask the delegation, the Ukrainian delegation, what high-level cases are on the docket for prosecution, which raises suspicions in some quarters that Biden's advisors were fishing for information about Shokin's plans for prosecuting Burisma oligarchs, something Hunter Biden had been asked to find out. In a January 21st email, Pyatt told Ciamarella to buckle in, because as he later explained to Senate investigators, the deal was a difficult issue and there was going to be political controversy around this news. The former ambassador demurred when he asked if conditioning the $1 billion on Shokin's firing was Biden's idea or came from his office. It was our interagency policy, he testified, adding, I don't remember when the vice president would have weighed in on this. However, Pyatt allowed that it was a sudden change in policy at the beginning. He said, it was not our expectation that Shokin's removal would be necessary. Indeed, on October 1st, 2015, memo summarizing the recommendation of the Interagency Policy Committee on Ukraine stated, Ukraine has made sufficient progress on its anti-corruption reform agenda to justify a third loan guarantee. Ciamarella was a member of the IPC task force, which monitored Shokin's office. The next month, moreover, the task force drafted a loan guarantee agreement that did not call for Shokin's removal. Then in December, Joe Biden flew to Kiev to demand his ouster. If what Ciamarella expressed in his email, which he knew would be part of archived White House records, was a genuine reaction, it appears that Vice President Biden went against the recommendation of one of his top NSC advisors on Ukraine. If Ciamarella were genuinely alarmed, he might have blown the whistle on his boss like he did on Trump, but he stayed mum. If, on the other hand, Ciamarella were a party to the quid pro quo discussions, as Pyatt suggests, then he had a direct conflict, noted Derek Harvey, the former congressional investigator involved in the first impeachment. Either way, Ciamarella clearly found himself in the middle of a major controversy. Just weeks prior, White House photos indicate that Ciamarella traveled with Biden on the same December 2015 Air Force Two flight the vice president took to Kiev to threaten Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko to act Shokin. Republicans have accused Biden of pushing Shokin's ouster to block scrutiny of his son's actions. Biden called an audible and changed U.S. policy towards Ukraine to benefit his son on the plane ride to Ukraine, Comer said, and later bragged about withholding a U.S. loan guarantee if Ukraine did not fire the prosecutor, Shokin. Biden and his supporters have repeatedly claimed Shokin had to go because he wasn't cracking down on corruption, and that everyone else in the administration, as well as Europe, agreed Shokin should be fired. This remains the prevailing narrative in major U.S. media. But around that time, Shokin had conducted a raid of Burisma oligarch Mykola Zlotovsky's home, seizing his house, cars, and other assets. IRS Special Agent Joseph Ziegler, who examined Hunter's emails as part of his investigation of Hunter for tax evasion, said Shokin was identified as a key target in emails exchanged between Hunter and Burisma officials in November 2015. The month before Biden traveled to Ukraine to demand Shokin's removal, just days before Biden arrived in Kiev in early December 2015 to demand Shokin's ouster, Hunter allegedly called his father from Dubai following a meeting there with Burisma official Vadim Pozyarsky, who asked him to pressure his father to shut down Shokin's investigation. Vice President Biden was familiar with Pozyarsky, having met with him in April 2015 during a dinner at Cafe Milano in D.C., arranged by Hunter. The unstated goal was to have the Ukrainian prosecutor removed in an effort to close the criminal case against Burisma founder, Zlotovsky. Ziegler said in a recent testimony before the House impeachment inquiry. After Shokin was pushed out of office, the Burisma investigation dried up. Ciamarella tried to marshal a defense for Biden in the whistleblower complaint. He said to Rep. Adam Schiff in August 2019, he listed among Trump's concerns at the time of the fateful July phone call that former Vice President Biden had pressured Poroshenko in 2016 to fire Shokin in order to quash a purported criminal probe into Burisma Holdings. but Chiamarella attempted to pour cold water on the notion by referencing a Bloomberg News article that quoted a former senior Ukrainian prosecutor who falsely claimed that Mr. Shokin was, in fact, not investigating Burisma at the time of his removal in 2016. White House emails reveal that Chiamarella was looped into messages sent by Biden communications team who were concerned that Hunter Biden taking a position on corrupt Burisma's board created unseemly optics and undercut their boss's mission to clean up corruption in Ukraine. So basically, there's a little more here, but I don't want to keep blustering on. As you folks can see now, they have emails. They have this guy, Chiamarella, that was pretty much the puppet master of all of Joe Biden's things in Ukraine. Joe Biden put him in Ukraine for this. And this is the guy that blew the whistle on Trump on the perfect phone call that Trump calls. So this guy is involved with all of he's complicit in the Biden stuff. And then he whistleblows on Trump to detract them from investigating it. But I think now they got Chiamarella and another few things that are going to fall. And we may see what really went on with the Bidens in Ukraine. What do you think of all this, Bill? I know there's a lot and there's a little bit more, but I think we can go by that and just see that this is very important information.
Well, I think that by the way, good job, Steve. I'm not sure you could cover that issue any more succinctly than that. It's a pretty massive issue. There's a lot to it. Anybody who is interested in both sides of the story can easily look up the clip on YouTube of Joe Biden openly bragging about how he had, as vice president, had basically took it upon himself to change U.S. policy and threaten an ally of ours to fire a prosecutor who, by all measures, was an Elliot Ness of a corruption seeker. And you can't, I'm sorry, but you'd have to be completely in the tank or just wearing blinders to not make the connection between the fact that the investigation into Burisma would have revealed an unsupported, clearly corruption-driven payment to the son of a U.S. president, which was influence peddling. And I don't know if people can't recognize that influence peddling is the equivalent of selling out your country. So I don't know what to tell people. Okay. So now we have emails. So now how many people are going to be open-minded enough to look at this and say, this kind of stinks. The guy that had a moral issue with Donald Trump demanding an investigation into what looks, well, like I said, looks like a duck and walks like a duck. It's a duck. It looked like a duck. You got every reason to hold, not deny, just put a hold on something to get answers. So if that, maybe he was accused of political, one-upsmanship or trying to put politics above policy. But the fact is that there was, I think anybody, remove Donald Trump's situation, say that anybody else was president, say Nikki Haley was president, say any one of the people that ran against Donald Trump for the Republican nomination was in that situation, would they still think it was a big a deal that he wanted to root out the possibility that influence peddling over energy in a country as huge and influential in the energy market as Ukraine? I don't know. So now that they've got the emails, are people going to look at this, Steve? So I'm just going to close. I'm going to make this brief. What now? What do they do with this? This stinks. This whole thing absolutely stinks. He had no issue with Joe Biden playing protect his boy from political whack-a-mole to all of a sudden having this outrageous contempt for Donald Trump's looking into it as a matter of jurisprudence. What do we do next? Is this going to go anywhere, or is this going to result in any kind of an inquiry, or is it just going to get swept under the rug?
Well, they're still in the impeachment inquiry, and they did ask people if Chiamarella was on the witness list, and they wouldn't answer them.
Okay.
So I would say that this is coming down. We're going to see a lot more, and right here is to me, it's almost like the smoking gun. The gun's hot right now. I don't know if it's smoking yet, but it's close, because you just said it. This was a shift, and I said it in the article, but you just reiterated a shift in our U.S. policy on Ukraine. That right there is the whole quid pro quo for the $1 billion guarantee.
That's a State Department decision or the president's decision, not the vice president's decision.
100%. But then Obama was the smart one to send Joe Dummy to do it instead of himself. So,
well, okay, but does that mean that he gave it a de facto authorization for Joe to institute or change policy?
I would say, yeah, or he wouldn't have said that. Definitely.
No, I mean, maybe I didn't word that properly. Does assigning Joe to handle it like Biden has assigned Kamala the various causes that she hasn't delivered on? Does that actually give her influence to change policy or just to enact for him because he's busy doing other things?
Well, that he could be complicit in it if that's what you're alluding to. I don't know, but
I'm wondering where the power begins and ends here. You know, because I'm wondering if Joe really overstepped and took liberties that he wasn't legally authorized to take.
Yeah, I don't think he overstepped though, because I don't think he would say that. He was sitting on a stage in front of people when he said that quid pro quo statement. I don't think he'd do that if Obama was involved. But I don't want to harp on this. I am going to watch this story. The impeachment is fascinating to me because it's so much more than the Trump impeachment. And I just think that Joe Biden is corrupt. I think that we need to look into it a little bit more, and we'll see what lays down the road for us. But we're going to go right on and let you take over the next couple segments, Bill. Go right ahead.
All right, Steve. Thank you. Let's talk about what the top story of the day is right now. Everybody in the country is talking about the protests going on across the country, primarily, if not exclusively, on college campuses, anti-Israel, and shockingly or not, I'm actually speaking tongue-in-cheek here, not just anti-Israel and pro-Palestine, but pro-Hamas. So if you want to just take a second to absorb that, we have an exorbitant amount of college students in this country saying that terrorism is basically okay. I'm at a loss to not be just outraged by that. So let's just take it from the beginning. I tried to compartmentalize this, Steve, and keep it into a series of questions and answers that I came up with, and just small facts about things, and to cover a very large and controversial story. The fast facts are a wave of anti-Israel protests have swept U.S. colleges campus in the last week and continue to escalate. They're not going away. They're escalating and leaving quite a trail of destruction of careers and policy and everything else in its wake. In addition to that, dozens of arrests have been made. Law enforcement has been called. There are talk about National Guard. There's talk about cancellations of events and education of people who are choosing not to be entitled assholes are being affected by campus lockdowns and things like that. And then, of course, something that people should be talking more about is all the Jewish students who have said that they not only feel unsafe, they feel their lives are in danger and aren't even comfortable going to school. So their education and as well as their safety and livelihood is being completely affected by all this, and it doesn't seem to be letting up at all, and it's alarming. So, but basically, what we have down is we know about the situation. We know what's happening. We know that there are people who are have seized campuses. They've set up tent encampments. We have an occupational building at Columbia University where really a lot of the most outrageous shit is happening in Columbia University in New York. And what we have is that they are demanding that Israel, that all the universities that they attend, as well as of the U.S. government, that we basically entirely reverse our policy on Israel, not support it, and then demand that any company that the universities are doing business with that support Israel in any way, that they stop doing it. And then on top of that, they are demanding that none of them can be held accountable for their actions as they disrupt other students, break laws, cause general violence and other bad behavior. This is what's going on. So what happens is like I said, I broke it down into a couple of questions about what is. So that's what's happening. That's the what if. What's being done about it will be the second question. Well, some of the universities are cracking down on the anti-Israel agitators, as the protesters they escalated the situation when they pushed the amnesty angle, in which they basically said, we're going to do whatever we want. You're not going to do anything about it. So universities across the country are cracking down on these protesters and protests who have taken over their campuses. The protesters demanding that colleges divest themselves, obviously, as I mentioned. Well, this week saw dozens of arrests at Columbia, Harvard, Yale, and elsewhere. Anti-Israel protesters at University of North Carolina, however, they took down the American flag this week and hoisted the Palestinian flag during demonstrations on campus on Tuesday, today. And UNC Chapel Hill Students for Justice in Palestine boasted on Instagram that the group had removed the American flag from the center of Polk Place and replaced it with a Palestinian flag. Per reporting from the university newspaper, the Daily Tar Heel, protesters formed a circle around the flagpole, locking arms as counter-protesters stared them down on the steps of the South Building. Anti could be heard chanting Intifada and Free Palestine. So this is where we're at now. Intifada, it means rebellion and basically death and destruction. Holy war, call it what you want. So the interim chancellor, Lee Roberts, later led a team of law enforcement officers who took down the Palestinian flag and replaced it rightfully with the Stars and Stripes. And then many people were chanting USA and singing the national anthem. And as they did that, protesters did it again. So they actually took the flag, the American flag, and took it off campus as people were yelling shame at the flag itself as they left the campus. So that's North Carolina. All right. So then UT Austin, which was in the news yesterday when the deadline passed, UT Austin moved in and they actually started arresting people. UT Austin tells Fox that the majority of protesters who were arrested Monday after taking they arrested 74 people, only 37 of which were students. That's another part of the story. 45 unaffiliated with the school and 34 were students. That's in line with the total number of arrests disclosed by the DA. And she did not disclose a comment on the ratio of students to non-students, but the officials at the jail contradicted the statements earlier. The rest have been bogged down resources, and they said that they were not overwhelmed. They were just busy with the arrests. I guess that was brought up at some point. A Jewish student tried to delay the mob takeover of Columbia's Hamilton Hall, but he said nothing ever developed because the police never came. But this student did bravely try to stop a mob of anti-Israel protesters taking over an academic building last night, the one that is now occupied. And they tried to delay the agitators long enough that police and security could arrive, but none of them showed up. Rory Wilson, a 22-year-old history senior, said he's under the university police's watch and that the New York police never arrived. Morehouse College has given an update on Biden possible commencement not happening due to Biden's obvious support of Israel as a U.S. policy. So this is what's being done. So interestingly, one thing that was done that cracks me up is as pro-Palestinian protests broke out on the campus of UCLA, following similar demonstrations, an anonymous group erected large video screens facing the protesters, and they put footage of the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel on a loop. And it just showed them the depravity that was committed against the Israelis, including the interview in which one of the knucklehead Hamas members had boasted to his mother proudly that he had personally killed 10 Jews, which probably incensed people a little more, but it was a brave move. And it's good that somebody stood up to him. And someone on Twitter came out, X, and said, anyone know how we can do the same brilliant idea at Columbia? Yeah. So what's happening is, like I said, we know what's happening. I don't have to go on too much about it. If you don't know what's happening, you're simply not paying attention. But it started with Columbia. So it's important that we talk about Columbia. Columbia is the students who have occupied the academic building as of this this podcast. They still have control of the building. They have really done nothing about eradicating just a situation, but they're talking about expelling students. That is a good thing because, frankly, nothing else is going to get attention than maybe some of the people realizing that there is consequences for your actions. Okay, so we know what they want. We know what they've done. Let's talk about the Jewish students. Okay, as Columbia anti-Israel encampments grow or at least endure. And by the way, is it interesting that these encampments, almost all of the tents are identical?
And they're brand new.
As if they were bought or brought by the same source.
Reason, yep.
Yeah, I'm just putting that out there, and yes, very sarcastically, I know.
George Soros.
Yes, George Soros. Well, they're finding that the Jewish students are calling it a hotbed of radical anti-Semitism. Protesters are shown to kill all the Jews, so they're not being subtle. We want one Arab state, and of course, our personal favorite, from the river to the sea, which, and you and I don't need to be reminded of this, but people, that is a call for the eradication of an entire group of people. And anybody who wants to put a softer spin on that is full of shit. That's what it is. It is an eradication. It is about extermination, that they have no right to live, and that the river is Jordan, and the sea is where they want to push all the Jews into as they watch them go down for the third time. Okay? This is not funny. This is dangerous. And if you're a Jewish student and this is your environment, and your university's answer to this is that you go home and learn remotely after paying $70,000 to $80,000 a year to go to this school, and then it's unbelievable. The least of it is the impact their education. They don't feel safe. Okay, so at the end of the day, the Colombian president Manouche, I believe that she's a practicing Muslim. Shafiq, she's saying enough is enough. One student said, but frankly, it's absurd and ridiculous that we have such a growing lack of faith in the administration's ability to protect us, which is their responsibility. How can it be allowed to continue? Michael Littman, a junior at Columbia, said, he said it's absurd and ridiculous that this is allowed. And then Littman also said it is the ongoing unauthorized encampment, of course, by the pro-Palestinian anti-Israel groups on campus, which was erected on April 17th, the same day that the university president traveled to Capitol Hill to testify before Congress about the university's handle of rampant anti-Semitism since October 7th, an issue we've talked about many, many times, when thousands of Hamas-led terrorists butchered, we know the story. So as the Columbia protests continued, Jewish students told the Times of Israel, which is a pretty good source on this story, they were fearful, angry, and disappointed. Most are afraid for their physical well-being, and all have said they are deeply disillusioned in what they call the university's continued inaction regarding their physical safety and ability to quell outright anti-Semitism on campus. So Columbia University is facing a full-blown crisis, heading into Passover of all things, as a rabbi linked to the Ivy League school urged Jewish students to stay home. Intense confrontations on campus sparked condemnation from the White House and New York officials. Well, what is the White House to do? Okay, because there is an issue here about the election. Not that it's a big issue, but this is a big problem for Biden. Okay, because the youth of the country is turning on him, and he is either going to reverse policy, which, let's face it, he is. I'm giving Biden some kudos here. He is following this country's stated policy of supporting Israel, and he is losing on a front that he just can't win on this one, because if he reverse policy, enough Democrats are going to have a problem with that as well. And he also has the Jews to answer to, who are very big supporters of the Democrat Party. So he has a big issue going on here. So away from that, though, the players, this is interesting, Steve. I know you know one player. His first name is, But Columbia University and several of the universities are dealing with potential outside agitators, progressive anti-Israel agitators, including those who mobilized at Columbia. Well, they're associated with far-left groups and dark money and liberal mega donors like George Soros. One group is National Students for Justice in Palestine, NSJP, a national organization affiliated with around 200 independent chapters on colleges. has had a vocal presence at Columbia in recent days, and at one point said it walked away from talks with school leaders until administrators pledged to not have them arrested. Okay. Well, NSJP operates under Westchester Peace Action Committee Foundation, a fiscal sponsor, whom Fox News Digital previously reported a six-figure donation to a nonprofit bankrolled by the George Soros Network, Westpac, whose funding is largely unknown, has espoused anti-Israel rhetoric for years, including the government accusing them of apartheid, ethnic cleansing, genocide, collective punishment, and war crimes. NSJP regularly compares Israel's treatments of Palestinians to Nazi Germany and the Jim Crow era in the United States, accusing Israel of genocide, and has really promoted Hamas propaganda since October 7th. And then, additionally, the Tide Center, which funds organizations behind Hamas sympathetic protests held after the terrorist October 7th attack, has long helped shape the progressive agenda with the financial backing of Bill Gates and George Soros. For the Democrat-allied charity, sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, also retains another key supporter in the federal government, which directly or through sub-awards steered more than $81.2 million to the Tide Center between 06 and 23. And then the last group is Within Our Lifetime, and they held a protest outside the walls of Columbia, and they said with their signs, resistance by any means necessary. Columbia, you will see we are all SJP. Columbia, you will learn refugees will return. The demonstration illustrated the scope of pro-Palestinian protests taking place beyond college campuses. So that is essentially, there's more. I mean, I could go on. I'm not going to. We know that the police in Texas clashed with students. We know that Columbia is threatening to expel. We don't know if they will. So let's get on to the more important matters here, okay? What are we thinking about higher education at this point, Steve?
I mean, we had a discussion the other day. I think higher education's in big trouble.
I do too.
I think that the people that are giving these exorbitant tuitions to these schools, I know you and I had a vehement conversation about that sure. If our children were involved in these protests, we'd be pulling up at that school, packing them up and saying, you're out of that school, but we'd also be suing the school to get our money back. But we'd also tell our kid, you're on your own. Go get a job. We are not supporting that at all.
Okay, well, a Jewish student is in the hospital right now having eye surgery because she got jabbed in the eye with a Palestinian flag as an attack, may lose her eye. I wonder if the school is responsible for that.
They are responsible for that. That's their safety and security. Now, before you move on, I do want to point out one thing.
Please do.
The only president of any college that we're watching that I think seemingly got it was MIT's president.
Yes.
She came right out and condemned it all, said it was untenable, but she did point out a big thing that you were saying. Her issue, or main issue, is that she believes that there are outside protesters coming in that don't even go to the school that are exacerbating an already volatile situation. And her calling that out, I give her mad credit, and she should be recognized in this podcast for doing such a thing.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. See, the problem is protesting. I'm not just trying to be fair and balanced here, okay? I have respect for protest, okay? Let's face it, this country is a result of a protest, okay? The Revolutionary War was a protest with guns, okay? You need to stand up and sometimes make people realize that when an injustice is done. And you can look at the 60s, okay? The 60s, largely the protests were against the Vietnam War, okay? The Vietnam War was a matter of, soldiers who were going to fight a war, they weren't the ones that decided whether it was unjust, but the people in the country felt it was unjust. They took to the streets, took to the campuses, and they made their voices heard. Largely, they understood the issue, and largely, they were peaceful. And they were educated about what was going on. Okay, I don't appreciate the fact that they treated the soldiers so poorly when they came home. The whole country did. But people had an educated opinion about Vietnam, anything from saying that you didn't believe that it was our business to be there or the way in which the war was conducted. But this is entitled kids. One editorialist actually likened them to cosplay, in which these students are actually acting out what it's like to be a revolutionary protester, have no skin in the game, have no understanding of the issues, and the fact that they're largely supporting Hamas does indicate that. This is not protest. This is acting out. This is causing shit for the sake of causing shit. Okay, and it's untenable. It's inexcusable. Some of these students who are paying exorbitant tuitions are being knocked out of their routines and everything else because of this. Real safety issues. And then they're calling it a protest. It's not a protest. And I don't know how you feel about what I just said, but I'm trying to be fair about what is happening. But what is actually happening is political subversiveness.
The only issue I really have about this is you're supporting Hamas. Hamas is classified as a terrorist organization. If you do that in this country, you're supposed to be associated with them and then prosecuted. They're not doing that. People are getting hurt, like that girl you just said with the flag. I mean, the school in its microcosmic society, their main goal, just like our country and Joe Biden, is to protect its students.
That's
and
right.
Joe Biden's supposed to protect its citizens. Both of these are missing their basic premise of being around by a long shot. And it's absolutely terrible. And I think that every parent that has a child going to these schools that is not in the protest station should sue the school to get their money back, which doesn't, they should get a free year of education at that institute, in my opinion.
Sure. And if you support terrorism, isn't that grounds for deportation? If you happen to be one of these students that comes from foreign countries that comes here and shits all over this country after we provide the opportunity that we're doing. Yeah, that's what I thought too. All right, so I'll move on. I tried to do the subject justice without beating it to death. There's a lot of stuff happening though. Yep. So I'm going to stick with my theme of protest, Steve. And this one's close to me because we live in New England, and this story took place in Seabrook, New Hampshire. In 1977, over 2,000 protesters occupied the Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant construction site in New Hampshire. Okay, I remember this like it was yesterday, and I was only like 11 years old. And the reason I remember it is that my neighbor drove a Dodge that was made partially in Japan, and some of the protesters trashed his car because it wasn't made in America. Huh. And I'll never forget that. He was a really good guy. He was a little older than like about the same age as my father, but a really good man. And I felt bad for him. And this is when it happened. So long story short, on May 1st, 1977, 2,000 protesters occupied the Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant construction site in New Hampshire. 1,414 of them are arrested in what becomes the largest mass arrest in American history. I did not know that. Anti-nuclear demonstrators set up flags, tents, and toted signs reading "Split wood, not atoms," and "Go fishing, not fission," as they occupied the property for nearly a day. State police were deployed to dissolve the occupation, and the advocates were charged with trespassing on the site of a proposed nuclear energy plant. I guess they weren't aware that with nuclear energy, they're violating a whole shitload of federal laws. Oh, yeah. And detained the National Guard armories for up to 2 weeks as they awaited due process.
Absolutely.
The demonstrators, known as the Clamshell Alliance, opposed the construction of the $2 billion Seabrook nuclear power plant. Work on the plant had already been halted by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission following the Federal Environmental Protection Agency's concerns that the plant's cooling system could endanger marine life. And that is still a concern today because, as we know or don't know, nuclear power plants expel large amounts of non-treated but extremely hot water back into the ocean. And the ocean, of course, it changes the temperature of it. And this power plant is in view of the beach. So people who spend time in the Seabrook area on the beach get to look at this unsightly power plant, and then they worry about what might be coming out of it.
But
well, in this case, hot water.
Freezing Bill there.
Yeah, I know. I know. But this was the concern that it would alter marine life habits and migratory patterns and all these other things. But there was a national notoriety for this demonstration because the anti-nuclear movement was strong at the time. And the mass arrest caused a lot of outrage, and it actually helped the anti-nuclear crowd quite a bit. So we know what nuclear power is. We know that we're leaning more towards it as we have found more safe ways to dispose of the waste. And as of yet, there has not been any kind of incident at that power plant. But only 6 years after that, 3 Mile Island happened in Pennsylvania, and the whole issue erupted again. So that concludes my segment, sir.
Very good. Good information. I love hearing about stuff that's close by us, too. That's very important. I love it. But we're at the end of the podcast. I always end it with a feel-good story or a technological breakthrough or a healthcare breakthrough. This one's more of a human interest story that I just found amazing, so I wanted to bring it to you. So after childhood cancer diagnosis, donor bone marrow from little sister sends it into remission. A young girl in the English city of Sheffield has seen her rare blood cancer go into complete remission, and she has her even younger sister to thank for it. Diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, ALL, in 2020 at age 6 after collapsing in the school playground, the family was desperate for donor stem cells from bone marrow to treat the rare form of the disease. Remarkably, it was none other than 6-year-old Ruby Learning's 2-year-old sister, Mabel, who came up as a perfect match and was able to donate her bone marrow to keep Ruby alive and treat her cancer. It was a long and difficult road that involved scares and good fortune. Ruby's grandmother, Amanda Fawcett, spoke to SWNS about how difficult it was. It's every parent's nightmare. I was in the room with her mom when we found out, and you just can't take anything in at all. It was all just heart-shattering, she said. Typically, ALL is treatable with just chemotherapy, but the kind which Ruby had been diagnosed with required a bone marrow transplant in addition. When Ruby's leukemia did not respond well to chemotherapy, she received a relatively new drug called blintumabab, which got her leukemia into remission and allowed us to perform her bone marrow transplant. Blintumabab, or Blina, as it's affectionately called for short, is a gentler chemotherapy and immunotherapy drug that has cured children of cancers with significantly less pain and despair than heavier chemo treatments. Blina is a kind of targeted therapy drug called a bispecific T-cell engager, BITE. It's administered via a pump and plastic bag through a tube inserted into the patient's arm. The bag is carried around in a slim backpack, and the supply lasts a few days. When the Blina was initially successful, Ruby's medical staff began to look for donors. We weren't expecting Mabel to be a match at first, but thankfully she was. So we just couldn't believe our luck, Fawcett told Fox News. It was amazing. We were so thankful. Declared cancer-free in 2022, the family says that because Mabel has come to realize that she did for her sister, she asked to borrow nearly everything of Ruby's, but Fawcett said it's all fun and games. She's a happy, normal, and healthy 10-year-old girl who loves swimming, dancing, and piano lessons, she said of the girl. After childhood cancer diagnosis, donor bone marrow from little sister, it does send her into her complete remission, which is a great thing. And I am very happy to see that a 6-year-old girl, we are too young for things like this to transpire in their lives. They found a way to get her back into remission and help her. Wonderful stuff, Bill. What do you think?
Well, look at my shirt, right? St. Jude's. One of my favorite causes, always donated to it. Children's cancer. Cancer is a brutal, ruthless adversary.
Terrible.
But it is just so 100,000-fold worse with children. It's horrible. And this is such a nice story to hear about, as is the success rate that St. Jude and the Shriners Hospital, which I'm also affiliated with, and other hospitals across the world are making against this stuff. Bone marrow therapy is tough. I can tell you for a fact that I know somebody who donated bone marrow to his brother who did not make it, but the process did give him some hope for a while, and it was a screw. I don't even know if there's a word for the way this guy described the pain.
But you think donating. And that's what I was thinking of when you told me about the pain of this little girl doing
this is the part of the story that the donor made not just gave the gift of life, but let me tell you something. I know for a fact that they made a just legendary sacrifice for her sister, and happy endings tend to eradicate all that, but it's a tough process. Bone marrow donation, you have to drill into somebody's bones, and there is no local for that.
No.
But it's a wonderful story, Steve, and it's a great one to end the podcast with. I have nothing but awesome things to say about it, and I can say this: since we started doing this podcast, you have continuously shown me and, of course, our audience that there's so much hope for the diseases that have ravaged lives for just centuries, you know.
And I love that we do this, and we'll continue to do this. But
well, we need to. It's the best part of the podcast. It really is.
Well, thank you once again for listening in or watching the We Are Marshall podcast. My name is Stephen Marshall. This is my co-host, Bill McIntyre. We are just two guys discussing the issues of the day, laying out the facts of those issues, and giving you our opinion and view on those issues. We would also love it here at the We Are Marshall podcast if you would like and share all of our episodes around your social media. We can be found on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Locals, X, Truth Social, and Rumble. Rumble is where we populate our full channel with season 1 and 2 of all of our episodes. Download the free app Rumble and then search for the We Are Marshall podcast. Then subscribe and follow to get notification of new episodes and other endeavors by Bill and I. Check out our episodes on all these social media sites and share them to help us grow. We would also love it if you would check out our website at www.wearemarshallpodcast.com. You can see a number of things Bill and I are working on the website. If you go to Bill's bio, you can click on a link to all his blog posts and check out Vela on Amazon, where Bill also writes episodic short stories for your viewing. Check out my 2 new books currently for sale on Amazon, The Unforeseen Enemy and The Perception Therapist. Both are available now. Also, check out our sponsors, Local Prints New Hampshire. You can go to our website again at www.wearemarshallpodcast.com and click on the link to Local Prints New Hampshire on the top left. They're a full-scale screen printing company in Hampstead, New Hampshire, and they are available for domestic and international printing. Go support them as they do support us. Also, check out our large sponsor, MateConnector.com, a large dating website just like all the other big dating websites out there, with all the features that the big players have in the dating sphere, but Mate Connector is much more inexpensive than any of the other players in the dating market. And also support our new sponsor, Army Ranger Painting and Contracting. They can be reached at www.armyrangerpainting.com. And they are a full-scale contracting company in the southern New Hampshire area. They cover Mass and New Hampshire. Go check them out and get them to give you a free estimate. If you have any questions or issues, you can reach us both at the following emails: bill@wearemarshallpodcast.com and me, Steve, at wearemarshallpodcast.com. Thank you for listening.